Harper. Hartke.
Here.
James.
Here.
Jay.
Here.
Kibler.
Here.
Kurtz. Langenheim. Maxwell. McGuire.
Here.
Michaels. Mitchell.
Here.
Petrie.
Here.
Quisenberry. Richards.
Here.
Rosales.
Here.
Schrader. Schwartz. Alex.
Here. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Mr., I don't know, Mr. Rosales and Mr. Kibler. Any comments, questions, corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The agenda is approved. We'll open the floor for public participation. Seeing no interest in public participation, we'll close public participation and go on to communications. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say to the board? That was easy. We'll move on to item 6, approval of direction to the county administrator for finalization of the fiscal year 2015 budget.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. We've got essentially, give you sort of a brief overview here. We're going to talk about Deb's decision points based on a recommendation there, and then Deb has 2 other issues to talk about, which are essentially revenue neutral requests related to items on this list. So I am going to let Deb take over at this point.
Okay. I will first talk about the new document you have at your desk tonight, which are 2 proposals that have been put together by some of the elected officials and department heads in terms of trying to corroborate to accomplish 2 of the requests on the list for additional programming. The first one is a proposal for the addition of a desktop support technician. This would be added to the IT budget. The purpose for this position would be for IT to have a desktop support technician at the courthouse, the downtown campus, at all times during working hours. Currently, we only have 1, and it's very difficult to cover all of the buildings, and the courts and sheriff's offices are frequently in need of having this service readily available to them, so this would place a position there. And the funding for that we have identified comes from the elimination of 2 current positions, a part-time clerk position in the circuit clerk's office, which is budgeted at $12,382, and a full-time clerk position in the sheriff's office, which is budgeted at $23,216. The combination of the elimination of those 2 positions provides more than adequate funding for the full-time IT desktop support technician. So that's the first proposal. Are there any questions?
Ms. Petrie.
The amounts that you are showing here are just purely salary amounts and not benefit amounts. Is that accurate?
Well, benefits are budgeted on those positions, so that's right, because that's the only impact on general corp.
Okay.
But there would not really be any additional, because there will actually be salary savings, there will probably also be some savings in IMRF and Social Security, and one of these positions was eligible for health insurance, so that's already budgeted.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification.
Jeff, did I see your hand?
You did, thank you, sir. So part of what was in the email versus what's in this, just want to make sure this is a full-time elimination of these positions, or is this a one-time elimination?
No, this is permanent.
Permanent, thank you.
These positions have both been vacant for nearly 2 years, and both officials have agreed to permanently eliminate these positions.
Thank you.
Anybody else on this? Okay, let's go on to number 2.
The second one is the implementation of the disaster recovery system. It had been presented to you as a system that would have an annual cost of $56,925. The actual total cost is about $77,000. That $56,925 that you had listed on the sheet you previously had reflected the fact that part of this cost would be offset by revenue from the court's automation or document storage fund. What we have done is put together how this could be done if we implemented it effective on July 1st instead of January 1st in 2015. Cuts the cost in half to about $38,000. And what we have here is reflecting that it would require an increase in the IT budget of $22,950, because $37,950 is required. $15,000 of that is already in the IT budget. If we're able to do this, we will reprioritize other projects that would have been done in IT next year or delay them to future years. And then offsetting that cost is $15,000 that would come as a transfer into general fund from courts document storage for the courts and clerks' share of this, $3,500 as a transfer from the state's attorney's automation fund, and $3,500 from probation service fees, which means that you would actually be only $950 short for covering this, and that is offset by the savings on the first proposal that you just looked at. It is believed that this disaster recovery system is extremely important, especially to the criminal justice system offices. The circuit clerk and the state's attorney are very interested, and the courts are very interested in proceeding with e-ticketing for traffic tickets, e-plea for entering pleas, and e-filing, particularly for civil filings. And it is a requirement of AOIC that a disaster recovery system be in place before those initiatives can be implemented. That's one thing. Another thing is just having the complete backup of all of these systems is incredibly important. Right now, if we lost our system, we would be without technology for probably up to 30 days and without backup for that period of time in which we don't have the technology available to us. With this system, we would automatically be able to switch over. And finally, when we do regular upgrades and changes to our systems, this allows for seamless operation because we can do the upgrades on one system and then switch to the other and do the upgrades there.
Deb, before we take questions, can I ask you to address the issue of where we will find
Yeah.
money for this in future years?
On the back side of the same page where you see the yellow highlighting, this is taking it forward. So the total cost annually is $77,000. And this is based on the share of each of the various county operations in terms of what they require of these AS400 systems. And you can see that based on those percentages, on an annual basis, for example, courts automation and document storage would be 26% of the total cost, or $20,000. The state's attorney is 8%, or about $6,100. Probation court services, 8%. You can see the breakdown. The funding that would have to come from general corporate is highlighted in yellow and is a total annual cost of $25,410.
Mr. Quisenberry, I think you were first, and then Ms. Michaels.
Yeah, I don't have a question, I have a comment. Just to reiterate what Deb said at the end there, if you've been looking at this as a tool to deal with an emergency where somebody sets fire to the server racks, which almost never happens, I encourage you to think of this also in terms of a day-to-day operational value, in that this will permit us to do work on these systems without having the systems be unavailable. This when I first saw this, I thought it was a fail kind of service, but I've since learned that it's a service that we can utilize at any time that we need to transfer our operations off of our core equipment to do day-to-day work. If you're not in the IT world, you may not realize that happens monthly, sometimes weekly, when things are found that are wrong. You have to go through and patch servers, you have to change things, there's software upgrades. This means that we can do this without affecting operations, and that gives our IT staff a lot more flexibility about how they do that and what time of day they can do that at. So I encourage you to think of it in addition to its protection against failure, it is also going to help us be more efficient in serving IT needs.
I saw a couple of hands over here. Oh, sorry, Ms. Michaels, you were next, and then Mr. Kibler. Anybody else over there? Ms. Petrie, okay.
I just have a quick question here. The percentages, are those prorated based on what you think the storage or the usage would be? Is that how you kind of came up with these numbers?
Yeah, it is based on the utilization of all the various systems on the AS400s, and it's something we've used in the past. We've used it to pay for the AS400s and pay for the maintenance of them.
Mr. Kibler.
Ms. Michael stole my question, but there was a second part to mine with respect to the county clerk. Is there no need for the county clerk to do the same type of operations, given what's with respect to his day in, day out operations, because he's currently not on the list?
The real estate tax cycle system, the county clerk's automation fund is for vital statistics, is that right, or elections? Vital statistics. And the county clerk's vital statistics are on servers, not on the AS400 systems. So it would not be appropriate to bill his automation fund for this particular initiative. Now, obviously, the real estate tax cycle is supported, which the county clerk is a part of, but all of the real estate tax cycle is general fund funded.
Ms. Petrie.
My questions do not indicate that I don't appreciate the importance of it or that I do not support this. I'm interested, why is the 25% of the sheriff coming out of the public safety sales tax, whereas the rest is coming out of the general fund?
Because ever since Justice Technology was set up as part of the public safety sales tax when it was originally adopted, the sheriff's share of the ongoing technology costs for the New World system has been paid for by the public safety sales tax. And you will note in the public safety sales tax budget documents, there is a department budget for Justice Technology, and that's what it supports.
Any additional comments or questions on this request? Mr. Kibler?
I was going to say, I would move for adoption of both Proposal 1 and Proposal 2 into the budget.
Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Kibler and a second by Mr. Harkey to accept the county administrator's recommendation for these two programs, participation by the department heads and elected officials to get these two IT requests through.
Point
Ms.
of
Petrie.
order. I thought there was already a motion on the floor to approve the direction to the county administrator.
It was, but I don't understand that motion.
Yeah, there is, there is, but I would not mind taking a vote on this anyway, just to have the committee on record as supporting it. So
Well-
why don't we call this an amendment to the
That's
recommendations that are on the floor? Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of these recommendations, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Now, Deb, do you want to go through the decision points?
Yes, so the first decision point for the county board to make is what is currently in the budget for facilities projects in 2015 is $532,610. The request from the facilities committee is for $800,000. If you want to change what's in the budget, I need that direction from you at this point.
Do this from over here so I'm not blocking the screen. Is everybody comfortable with what's on this list, understands what's in the budget at this point and what's not? Any questions? Mr. James?
Well, I'm not, and I've said it before, when I look at the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund, and I've brought this up in every meeting, when you look at item 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, I know that there's been a lot of discussion about those items, but I think we ought to look at them, place a moratorium on them, do the necessary repairs and funding that we need to get our buildings up to code and up to snuff, because the longer we let things go, as we've seen, the more headaches we have and the more problems we have. I'm not saying do away with it forever, but I'm saying that we need to do some adjustment there. If we don't, so be it, but I'm not going to support the budget the way it is.
Thank you, Mr. James. Ms. Schwartz?
I think we have two separate items. One is general corp, one is public safety sales tax. And I think what you're talking about now is general corp. Wasn't that what?
Oh, we have one overall budget recommendation. I mean,
Can we
I was
split it?
assuming that they would be one and the same.
The money all ties in together in my mind.
Well, yeah, but we just voted on a teeny tiny part of the budget
Well-
separately. So can we split, there are two separate funds. One is general corp and one is public safety. Can we split that and talk about one at a time? Because it's complicated enough.
Sure. Is that a motion to divide the question between the recommendations for the general corporate fund and the recommendations for the public safety sales tax?
I think it's, yeah, I suppose I can make the motion, but what my point is, at least for discussion purposes, I think we need to keep it under control, and so can we talk one at a time? I don't care if we
That
vote on it all at once.
sounds to
but
me
at
like
least
a
not-
motion to divide the question. Will somebody second that? Seconded by Ms. Bergson. Any discussion? This just means that we'll vote twice, once on the regular recommendation, once on the general corporate recommendations and once on the public safety sales tax. Yes, Ms. Petrie.
Very much. I understand the argument to separate this, but many of these items under the public safety sales tax are items that get transferred over to the corporate funds. So I do not understand how we can legitimately separate the question. Thank you.
Can I say? I think my concern is the following. Deb put out some decision points. What Mr. James is bringing up is a whole different sort of story, which says it's not even on the decision points. This is something that already is in the budget that he's trying to open up, which is fine. We can talk about the whole $100 million of budget, not just these. I just think it becomes a little hard to keep track of what exactly we're looking at. I thought the motion was we're going to look at the decision points. And right now, we open it up not just to the decision points, we open it up to things that have been already in the budget. It's not a decision point. So I just want to keep it so that we understand what we're looking at.
Thank you. I will make a statement. I mean, I don't see a real need to stand on ceremony here. Obviously, we can discuss anything that's related to the budget, but I have no problem with taking two votes as well. All in favor of dividing the question, say aye. Any opposed? Aye. I'm going to say that motion fails. Mr. James, I think I understand what you're saying. Are you, did you make a point? Yes, I did. Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes, being a member of the Facilities Committee who voted for the recommendation that was sent, that's on the decision point here, the $800,000, I did so knowing full well that there was going to be competition for our dollars, or our lack of dollars, if you want to look at it that way. And there are a couple of things on our list that we know we are going to have a good chance of getting funds from the state energy grants to support them, and I think we're going to end up spending closer to that $800,000 than with that list if we do those things on that list. So I'm comfortable with thinking of it in those terms. The other thing that's on the list that I just have no confidence in at this point is the over $300,000 to remediate the satellite jail problem. I understand we have to proceed and we have to look at what that problem is and do something about it. But at this point, I do not have confidence that we know the extent of the issue and what the remediation is going to look like. We have one person who has a very dire prediction of what's going to happen, and we have another person who has basically a patch it up and move forward kind of approach. And until I know more, I'm not going to sign up for saying we need $305,000 to do that. I also think that we're going to get some recommendations in the early part of the year with regard to our long-term plan for our justice facilities, and that's going to work into this question of what needs to be going on in the satellite jail. And I'd like to understand if some of those recommendations might encompass the work that would repair parts of these issues. I just don't think I know enough to stick to my guns on an $800,000 recommendation that I think with $532,000 and doing the energy things, we're going to get closer to $750,000, maybe even $800,000 of money spent.
Anybody else? Mr. James, then we'll do Ms. Schwartz.
Well, just to follow up to what Mr. Quisenberry said, and I somewhat concur when he says that money may not all be needed, but not too long ago, the sheriff was really afraid about that building, those cracks, and we're going to go through another winter without anything being done to that building and those cracks. We are marching forward on that. We'll see what comes up at the next facilities meeting. But also, we've got to remember at facilities, we have shuffled that list around. We had roofing jobs and other jobs that have been put on the back burner. You know, an emergency comes up, we've got nothing really hanging there in the balance to do something in an emergency, and we're talking a lot of money. We've got issues at the nursing home that's going to be needing addressed, and we're not talking small potatoes there. So I'm just saying, when we look at this, the longer you let some of this go, the more you're going to have to spend later because more damage occurs to the things around it. And we can get a handle on it if we take some of those funds now and get this work done. And you're being, in my mind, dollar sensible, because once you're done, and then you can start allocating those funds back to where they need to go. But if we let it go too long, as we're seeing with our buildings, we have a host of issues and nobody wants to address them. So as I agree with him on some of the dollar amounts, what happens if that building turns out to be a $500,000 job and we need to do it? So we need to proceed carefully, and some of those other line items that I just threw out of the other fund, because they do tie in, is money that could be well spent now to fix some of that.
Thank you, Mr. James. Ms. Schwartz?
Okay, I have 2 points. One is for facilities, the other one is nursing homes, since we're opening up everything else. I think in terms of facilities, previous boards did a terrible job, just like this one has the past years, of not funding it. I absolutely agree with that. I think there is only one solution for that, because there is really no money. Okay, you can rob everybody. You can cancel Deb's position and take the money. That's just as good as canceling the public safety. Neither one of them is acceptable to me, just to make sure that was, I just thought that would be more obvious to you than maybe the public safety sales tax position. So I know, that's good. So they're all unacceptable, right? I think the only solution to that is next time we're going for bonds, and let's not kid ourselves, we will go for bonds. I don't know how much they'll be, but we will extend the jail, okay? So otherwise we wouldn't be paying anybody to do a study. So let's be realistic. Part of the bonds has to be for facilities maintenance fund, or whatever you want to call it. And there is no way around it. There is just no way around it. And if you can't maintain a building, don't even build it. So I'm not saying that you're wrong. I absolutely agree with you. These facilities, either by planned maintenance or disaster maintenance, has to be maintained, right? Doesn't matter how, if you budget for that or if you have to because it collapsed on you. But I don't think there is a place to take the money from. I simply think because we will go out for bonds, we'll just have to budget for that. And as much as I don't want to borrow more money than necessary, there is no such thing as necessary, because you cannot just build a building and then let it go to hell because you don't have the money to maintain it. So it should be budgeted. So I have a solution for your facilities. Okay. Sure.
Absolutely.
Rachel, you ought to work for the state, because that's the attitude they have. Borrow more money to just put on the taxpayers and keep making us pay them fees and fines and higher tax rates. We've got money here that's being allocated for stuff that could easily be cut for now, could easily be cut. And if you reallocate it and get your work done, then you can finally get back on the ball. And when you say borrow money on the jail issue or whatever issue to fix your buildings, a lot of these buildings were here long before the jail was here. You can't keep borrowing yourself out of problems and debt. We need to be sensible, we need to watch that dollar, and we need to work with what we have. And I hope somebody somewhere starts doing that, because we're just digging a hole.
Mr. Harkey, New County heard from.
I think that there's probably a lot of people around this table who've taken out a home equity loan to repair their home. So you can borrow money to do repairs. And maybe you haven't, but you obviously are a wise borrower. But I think we can find money for that. I completely also agree with what Mr. Quisenberry had to say earlier. The number that we came up with, 800,000, that includes a lot of projects that will be energy efficiency projects that we're going to get help for. We've already proven that with several projects of this last year. Dana and his team are very serious about following that up. So I have a full confidence that we can get done what's on that list with that kind of money. And also, the other advantage to that is when we do energy efficiency, we lower our power bills, and that's going to save us money in the long run. I also want to speak specifically to for lack of a better term, the drug court position. When you talk about being penny wise and dollar foolish, I think that position saves us so much money on incarceration, on getting people back into the community with their families, with their friends, with their jobs, with their paying their taxes. I think it's very short-sighted to think that that's something that we could easily cut and throw it towards building repairs. So,
Anybody else? I was going to, I mean, it's a difficult issue. I mean, I certainly agree with Mr. James that we have underfunded facilities maintenance. I mean, given for the last, I've only been on the board for 4 years, and the first 2 years of those, we spent approximately zero. Could we spend $800,000? Absolutely. Could we spend, $8 million? Probably. I mean, the board's it had a long history of neglecting its buildings. So I certainly think there's more money that more money there would be beneficial. That being said, I agree with Mr. Harkey that the whole point of the ILPP recommendation isn't to make everybody, feel good. It's to try to reduce the amount of money that we have to sink into a facility that we have to maintain in the long run. So I think that we were on the right track last year when we said, look, we're going to generate some additional revenue. We're going to spend the majority of it on facilities rehabilitation, and we're going to spend some of it on trying to reduce the overall facilities demand in the long term. So I guess I'm going to stand by the recommendation, but I'm in no means discounting the idea that we have a long-term facilities problem. Ms. Michaels.
On another item, could you re-explain number 3 point to me, please, again? Somehow I'm kind of confusing this up with something else in my brain. I think it has to do with public safety tax here. The $230,747, if you could explain that again.
That is the 5% set aside that has existed in the public safety sales tax since it was originally adopted in 1998 to be spent on delinquency prevention grant funding.
What exactly does the delinquency prevention grant funding, is that our offset to money that we're receiving? Is that our match or something?
No, it's been used for programming ever since it was initiated. In the first 4 or 5 years, the county board itself awarded grants and learned that that was a difficult process, and the mental health board has a process in place for doing that. So the county board entered into a memorandum of understanding with the mental health board in 2003 or 4 for the mental health board to annually include the award of this funding to agencies based on their process for accepting applications for funding and then entering into contracts to provide services. Currently, the funding is 100% committed to the Youth Assessment Center and a youth diversion program, which are both administered by the Regional Planning Commission.
But I guess the short answer is it's actually included in that's the 5% that's actually called out in the public safety sales tax ordinance to be spent on juvenile delinquency
Right.
issues. Rachel, nursing home?
Okay, so I know that this is not, I'm not trying to convince anybody, but for the record, because my guess is that we'll just go with, at least I would support what you said. Since we already have a deficit budget, I would not support anything other than what we already support the IT. So I assume that what I'm going to say about the 300,000 is not going to pass. But for the record, the $3 million loans that the General Corporate Fund made to the nursing home were made while the nursing home was run by the county board. There was no nursing home. There was no nursing home board. There was no MPA. We ran the nursing home. We did a poor job at running the nursing home. We lost money for various reasons. I'm not going to go into that now. We lost money, and General Corp had to fund it. Okay, so that's step number one. There is no they borrowed, they better pay, because they did not exist. The second point is the county board, for whatever reason, voted to forgive those loans several years ago. Now, you may not like it, but those loans were forgiven. So those of you who now want to resurrect the issue and say, oh, no, we lent them. So first of all, I said there is no them, we lent ourselves. But those loans were forgiven. So if we want to open up these resolutions and say, let's bring those loans back to life, that's fine. But as far as I'm concerned, these loans don't exist because they were forgiven. Third point is the nursing home has paid about $1.5 million so far on these bonds. There is another $3.5 million to be paid. The total estimate, I think, of what loans we made to ourselves on the nursing home were $3 million. So at what point do we stop it and say the nursing home doesn't have to repay back? Now, as I said, I don't expect anybody to take these $300,000. I understand General Corp doesn't have the money to support it. I get it. But we need to be honest when we discuss that.
Mr. J.
Well, I need help, yes. I get a little frustrated when you say that they don't need to pay it because we forgive the loan. When we built the new nursing home, we got into some problems that none of us expected, and we ended up costing us a little more money than we expected. But we also passed an additional method to fund the nursing home some additional cash money at the same time. And so it wasn't as though we just dropped the ball and said, here's your new home, take it, run. And fully expecting and being told, and all the people, the public were told that this nursing home would pay for itself. Don't worry about it. People will be flocking to get in this brand-new building. And it didn't happen. And we're going downhill. And we're going to continue to go downhill in my estimation. Not that I want that to happen. I don't have any control over it. But I think that all these issues do tie together because I've been told that the nursing home has quite a list of very important things that need to be done to the facility because we've let it go since it's been built. So at some point, we have a responsibility to say enough is enough, and if the nursing home doesn't fly at some point in time, 3 or 5 years or whatever down the road, God forbid, whenever that is, but it is going to happen, that we're not going to have enough money to do that, then we've got a choice to make. We either go to the public and say, public, if you want to keep the nursing home, it's going to cost you whatever we think it's going to cost. We've already done that to them once, and we weren't very good prosticanators at the time. So I can't support the nursing home for other reasons other than I didn't forgive them for the loan. You may have, but I didn't do that. I think the other thing that kind of concerns me, and we talk about budget for facilities, I will be honest, it's been a burr in my saddle since I've been on this board to sit and watch these facilities go down the tubes because we won't spend the money we need to spend just to maintain them. Not to improve them, just to maintain them. I don't have to remind any of you how long it took us to fix a bathroom, for crying out loud. That should have took 2 weeks, and it was like 6 or 8 months. We keep shooting ourselves in the foot. I don't think if we don't put the money in the budget, you can't spend it. So if you don't give facilities the money they need to do what they think they need to do this coming year, then they're not going to have the money. I don't care whether you sell bonds or not. It has to be in the budget to spend it. Am I incorrect?
Or you can make budget amendments.
I mean, there's currently 530,000 in that line to be spent this year.
In the deficit budget.
Well, it's not a deficit budget. I mean, it's. No, if we adjust the capital asset replacement fund, it's basically a balanced budget.
Yeah, you might want to talk about that decision point at this point.
Okay.
To see what it does to the overall budget.
Why don't you do that, Deb?
Okay, so
James,
we.
sorry, hold on, Deb, Ms. Quisberry. I just want to, if there's a question about the overall bottom line, I think we should get to that first, but go ahead.
I just thought it was important, after what Mr. J said, to provide a counterpoint. If we look at the nursing home, by all of the metrics except for, I'll say, 3, that we measure the success of the nursing home, all of the trends have been positive recently. And I'll say the 3 are food service, which has gotten all of the press lately, and the other items that have not, I had 3, I got 1, is the food service. But in any case, the metrics of how the nursing home is measured for its service has been trending up. I'll say contract nursing has not been so great in recent months, but it kind of mellowed out a little bit. But we can't talk about the nursing home. I can't see how we can talk about the nursing home going downhill. Its ranking is going up. Food service probably is the biggest impediment to that ranking being in the top tier. So you can talk about that it's going downhill, but I don't see it. The third thing that I did want to mention, besides the contract nursing and the food service, is the state. The state is not something that is an indicator of how good the nursing home is doing and whether it's successful or not. When the state is late on payments and the nursing home loses its cash position, that's not an indicator that the nursing home is doing poorly. That's something we all know, which is the state is doing poorly.
Thank you, and hold those thoughts. I'm going to go back. Mr. Maxwell, can you hold off while we let Deb run through the overall budget lines? Okay, no, go ahead, Mr. Maxwell. While we're on the nursing home. I do want to give Deb a chance to go through and basically look at the bottom line total here.
I think this probably is an appropriate place to talk about the nursing home from my perspective. The nursing home board of directors requested the bond payment to be used to invest in the capital improvements at the home and other improvements. I supported that request. I understand the county's general fund can't afford the board of directors' request. Denial of this request doesn't make the needs at the home go away. So I'm going to ask that in the coming months, members of this board consider and offer alternatives to fund the home's needs. And I'm going to conclude by saying I'm prepared to work with everybody here to make this home achieve its long-term mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Mr. Kurtz, and then we'll let Deb go to the bottom line.
Thank you. On the subject of the nursing home, I'm starting to hear, obviously, that we want to keep this nursing home. We want it to become viable. Is this the time for us to make a motion to ask our constituents and the public to, once again, support with a referendum in April for our nursing home, so that this might, with their support, help us in the future?
No, because it's not on the agenda, and this isn't the proper forum in which to discuss that. If we want to, I mean, the county board, county board can take that up, but it's not, it doesn't fall under recommendations to the direction to the county administrator for budget recommendations. So I'm going to say that's out of order. Ms. Schwartz?
Just to add to the long list of delaying Deb's comments. Before it makes it to the paper that the chairman of the county board wants to put the referendum, there are other options to support the nursing home, so before we talk about that, for example, we can limit the number of Medicaid people in the nursing home, which is really where the state is. The Medicare is fine, the private pay is fine. So just before we all panic and say, oh, we have to go for extra taxes, let's not go there. There are other options of keeping the nursing home viable without increasing taxes. And yes, it's not on the agenda, so no, we can't vote.
The issue tonight is the request from the Nursing Home Board of Directors for moving the $307,000 a year debt service on the supplemental construction bond from the nursing home budget to the general corporate budget. And I appreciate the other comments on the nursing home, but that's really the only issue that's on the table tonight. And currently it's not in the budget, which is my lead in to let Deb talk about what she needs to be talking about, which is why don't we go through, plug in the numbers, and see where we are with the bottom line.
The next item after the facilities recommendations is the capital asset replacement. And as you know, the budget was prepared with full funding for capital asset replacement, which means we're appropriating reserve for future items that need to be replaced in the future. We have not been able to do that since 2009. If we change that to only funding what needs to be purchased next year, that would only be $233,044. And if you make that decision, this is General Corp, yeah. Then the deficit comes down to basically $884 on a $35 million budget.
Mr. Harkey.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. I think that you guys have done a lot of work here. I mean, looking at the other recommendations that came up at zero with between the sheriff and the circuit clerk and the state's attorney, and Deb, what you've done, I think you guys have done a great budget. Of course, everybody has things that we all want that we cannot afford to do, but everybody's getting some of the things that are really important to them funded. And that, I think, is what democracy is, and that probably means it's a decent budget since we're all somewhat happy and somewhat unhappy. So I'm going to be in complete support of this.
Deb, you can add in, James is noting that you can add in $1,683 from your previous two requests?
I've already done that.
Oh, okay.
I entered your decisions on IT disaster recovery, which actually
Okay.
cost $950, but you saved $2623 with the IT position.
Okay, I just wanted to come back, so everybody's clear, that was part of my recommendation, was to adjust the capital asset funding such that we essentially do have a balanced budget. So I acknowledge that there's not as much money in there for a lot of things that people want, including facilities, but the money that is there really is there and really is going to be able to get spent. Ms. Bergson.
If we go from the fully funded capital asset to current funding, the money, the difference, if we find some of that money, will go somewhere else. It won't go back into capital asset. And maintenance funds and capital asset replacement, you just have to do sooner or later. And this is a good time to start.
I'm sorry, Mr. James, I didn't see you.
Just for the record, Deb, in that budget, what were some of the line items we were looking at doing away with in the capital asset?
We won't do away with anything in capital asset.
Just put it off.
We're only delaying. So, ideally, when it comes time to buy a computer, you only have to set aside 20% for that year because you've set aside 80% in the previous 4 years. So what will happen is you will see bigger spikes hitting the general fund in future years. And I can give you an example. The sheriff has MDCs, and when he replaces all of those MDCs by 2017, that's $450,000. And right now, he only has $146,000 in capital asset reserve to go towards that purchase. So it will have an impact, but it's what we've been doing. And the other part of it is the capital asset replacement fund balance obviously is coming down. It should be right at $1 million, and it's well below that at this point because we don't have, at this point, we have very little future reserve in it.
I guess I hold out hope that at some point we will see an improvement in revenues, and we can address that the way that we started addressing facilities last year, but it may be a while. Comments, questions, discussion? Seeing no more. Ms. Petrie.
There's two. One has to do with Ms. Schwartz's recommendation that we could change the percentage formula of residents and the payment thereof of their residency in the nursing home, and I'm not sure that as the intent of the public when they pass the referendum, so I'm not sure that's a viable solution for us. And the second is, I appreciate Mr. James' points on the public safety sales tax, and one item in particular has been concerning me, and that there's two. It's number 5, which I would like to see over time that fully come under the sheriff's budget. We're moving money over there for that, but that fully come under the sheriff's budget. And I appreciate Mr. Harkey's comments concerning the individual for the drug court. And I will support that for this year, but I do encourage those people involved with drug court to continue to look for some grant money to help defray the expense of that individual. Thank you.
I am inclined to agree. Deb, do you want to go on to public safety?
So public safety similarly has fully funded recommendation for capital asset replacement. And if you go to current only, that deficit comes down to $108,868. There's also currently $83,251 of previously unspent revenue set aside for the 5% delinquency prevention funding budgeted in fiscal 2015. At this point, $5,000 of that is committed to the current contract, which goes through June 30th of 2015 for the Youth Assessment Center and diversion programming. But if you wanted to change that to only 5,000, then there would be savings, additional savings of about 78,000.
And as worthy of a program as that is, my recommendation would be to reduce that to 5,000 under the principle of use it or lose it. Ms. Michaels?
Back again to the 5% committed, budgeted for the 2014 revenue designated for the delinquency prevention grant funding in fiscal year 2015. If there isn't anything that's contracted, why couldn't we take the difference out of number 3 here? There's 230,000 to get this budget balanced.
The additional 30,000? That's left? 30,000 in the hole, because you would not be meeting the 5% set-aside requirement that is in the ordinances that pertain to how the public safety sales tax is spent.
Can I ask you, how long is that ordinance in place for?
Forever. I mean, the first one was adopted.
Till we
in-
change it?
Until you change it. The first one was adopted in 1998, the second one in 2003.
So if I could ask this, do you mind? So we could go back and make this 4% at a later date or whenever, whatever, to try to get some of these things balanced and maybe look back at some of these capital asset funding and those type of things. If we want, if the board wanted to. It's not something set in stone forever in life. Okay.
I actually don't know the answer to that question. That might be one for the state's attorney.
Well, you changed the county board in 2003 changed the ordinance from what it had been in 1998. I believe a county board has the authority to do that. There is nothing about the referendum which established the public safety sales tax that mandates that you spend 5% per year on delinquency prevention grant funding.
Thank you. I think Mr. James and Mr. McGuire.
Deb, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember right, the change was the sunset clause on that?
That wasn't the only change. The current ordinance also indicates that that the proceeds from the public safety sales tax fund will be used for facilities.
Thank you.
And it previously did not say that?
Not exclusively. There were some changes made to it. I mean, maybe the board wants to look at that at some point.
Okay, thanks, Deb. Mr. McGuire?
Okay. I want to make sure I understand what Peter Tracy said about this program and how it was paid for last year, and that the money was actually spent. It wasn't, that it was just accounted for incorrectly?
You did a budget amendment this year, spending about 44,000 of monies that had previously been left unspent of this 5%, but that will be spent this year, in 2014. You've already authorized it, it will be spent.
For this year.
So that was originally about 128,000 that had been unspent for the delinquency prevention funding over a period from 2010 to 2012. And so you spent 44,000 and now it's down to 83,000.
Okay. All right. And then the youth assessment program is supported by the Champaign schools. They provide the building. And if people realize or read that there's a good possibility that they'll lose the building. So if we underfund it, the program will likely, actually it is right, because I was part of the youth assessment meeting that they just can I finish my statement?
Yeah, Ms. Petrie, can you wait your turn?
And that they may have it for about a year, but they're going to have to find a building within a year. May have to find a building within a year. They may let them stay, but there's going to be other parts of the funding that they will need. So the program that most affects our youth and the criminal justice system throughout the county, including Rantoul, Sedora, there's even kids from Sedora that come into this program, will be possibly underfunded as they are now just finishing their first year. So that's, while some of it, the funding may not have been used after a year of success. And in this meeting, it's not just, everybody looks at it as, maybe a social program to help the public or to help youth, which is really what it is. Both or all three, Rantoul, Champaign, Urbana, police departments use it to bring youth in and to control what kids end up. It's part of our criminal justice system. And if we lose it, then it's a piece where they don't have a place to really put these kids. So I understand there's a difficulty with the budget, but it's a big piece of our criminal justice system.
I think Ms. Schwartz was next, then Ms. Petrie, then Ms. Bergson. Did I
Two
miss
things.
anybody?
First of all, even though we don't have it in the budget now because these bonds were not refunded, I just want to remind us that those bonds will be refunded, and there's an expected savings of about $250,000. So this, we don't really, unlike the general corp that actually did have a deficit, we don't really have we will not have a deficit in a public safety sales tax once these bonds are refunded, as expected. The second part is the 5% is, just to remind us of the history, the referendum, I know it didn't specify 5%, but it also specified a sunset, or at least the referendum didn't. But people were sold on the referendum as, here's a tax, it will sunset when we're done paying the bonds. And so when the county board said, okay, you know what, forget about the sunset, we like the money, we need to use it, there was somewhat of a trade-off, and they said, how about if we put 5% into something that's not buildings? Because at the same time, we also put a lot of money, well, I wasn't, money into facilities. Okay, but in 2003, we decided to put money into facilities that have to do with technology, utilities of the courthouse, and so many other things. So I seriously think 5% is a really small amount. And as much as I don't care for people not spending it, I understand that maybe now there is a good cost to spend it. So considering that this is not really a deficit fund, I would just I would support keeping the 80-something thousand, assuming it will go for good use.
Betsy?
To build on what Mr. McGuire was sharing with you and to use the argument of my colleague here, the report that Darlene Koppel gave us at the RPC meeting last Friday, the population served in this short year's time has gone from about 150 up to 400 children. And that word isn't good, but anyway, individuals between the ages of 11 and 17. Thank you. I see you, Ms. Busey nodding her head. So if we're using Mr. Harkey's argument on drug court, I would think that this is a parallel argument for why we want to continue to fund that. And it is right, they have a reprieve for a year on their lease, and their concern is that when they have to go out to rent a building in a year's time, that there will be some additional expense. I did ask if they felt they would need more staff since it's become such a successful program, and they said no, that staff wasn't the issue, it was a building, and they are only closed from 3 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock. So it's almost 24/7 right now.
Ms. Bergson, were you next?
It seems to me we all agree we all agree that it's important to keep people out of jail. It's one of our purposes. And we all agree that the way to keep them out of jail is to keep them out before they get there. I don't think that's the place we should be cutting the funding.
Anybody else? Mr. Richards?
Well, public safety sales tax is not really an area where we need to claw back this funding. This had been earmarked in years past, and public safety sales tax, as Rachel said, is going to have a de facto and hopefully later real surplus, and it's fairly consistently the last several years run surpluses. It's not like general corp where we're always trying to figure out how to make things match up. This is something where this is not going to tank our any of these line items. This is not going to tank the public safety fund account balance or any of that. This is something that we can afford to do.
I guess at this point, I would ask you, Deb, I mean, to what extent are the envisioned savings for the bond refunding in the budget? And we don't know what those are going to be.
The first year savings will be saved in this year's budget because we pay next year's principal this year. And I'm hopeful that we will know by the time this budget is finalized, so we could amend it, probably not in October, but by November, to reflect that it would actually probably end up being revenue positive.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm hearing is general support for not taking this money out of the budget. The reason I'm advocating to take it out is because it's not there on paper. I mean, I am certainly amenable to the idea of looking at this again in a month or two, and before we finalize the budget, and determining whether we can get a more accurate estimate of what we think the public safety sales tax numbers are going to look like. Yeah, Deb, and then Mr. Richards.
In terms of, if you're talking about taking out the additional unspent revenue, I think all you're doing is saying you're only going to spend 5,000 of it next year. It's still in the fund balance. You know, and I would propose that we would keep track of that, and if there is a request at some point, but I think it should be reserved for one-time expenses because it's one-time money. You shouldn't really build it into the annual operating cost for whatever this funding is supporting, but if there is a need for a facility, for example, and the request were to use some of this money to upgrade or do something with a facility, that would be appropriate. And so just by taking it out now, out of next year's budget, I don't think you're forever removing it from consideration for delinquency prevention funding, because we'll keep track of it.
I think that's a good point. Mr. McGuire. I'm sorry, Mr. Next.
Yeah.
Then Mr. McGuire.
Yeah, I'm amenable to waiting to the end of October and November to see if this actually happens before we add this in, and also to make it a separate one-time expense if we decide to do it.
So are you okay with leaving it out for now, with calling it 5,000 for now?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. McGuire.
Is this an illness programs that are on a different fiscal year than ours? And the only issue I have with that is understanding how a program, you know, what the expectation is that when you're preparing to build a program and knowing what resources you have, and when it's getting cut, when the expectation is it may not be there.
Well, they know they've got the 5%, because that's our commitment. So the question is whether they also have this extra 83,000 of one-time money. And the answer to that, we don't know yet, because we don't know whether, I mean, we can't support a deficit budget.
Maybe I don't understand it, but I thought that this is 5% less 83,000.
No, the 5% is the 5%. This is 83,000 of money that was not spent in prior years. So it's in the public safety sales tax balance. So if you look at the impact of this budget on the public safety sales tax, right, we want the budget to be balanced. Well, there's 83,000 in there that if we allow it to be spent from prior years is going to make the budget $83,000 in deficit. Mr. Quisenberry.
So what I'm hearing you say, Deb, is that mentally, we all have to make a note that there's $78,251 in the fund balance that was allocated before but unspent, and we're taking it out of the budget for next year because it isn't recurring revenue, it's leftover revenue. So I guess if you could explain how some of us who don't remember things very well, not even the three things I wanted to say about the nursing home, how we can recall that we have that $78,251 that's good to spend for one-time expenses out of the fund balance, let me know.
These notes are listed in the budget document. So we'll list in the budget document, in the notes, that there is $78,251 in the public safety sales tax fund balance that is unspent from previously set-aside funds for delinquency funding that can be appropriated in the future.
And that footnote will stay in the budget each year until we actually spend it?
I would suggest that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask Deb, you will I know Dan, we will revise the revenue estimate for the public safety sales tax later in the year, right? I mean,
I'm not planning on
Okay.
revising them because it's flat.
okay, so you don't
not
see
seeing
a
anything that
positive
indicates-
or a negative trend
No.
in the public safety sales tax
It's flat
revenue?
right now.
Okay. Diane?
No, I wasn't
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think in the simplest form, in my mind, when I'm doing a budget, that if there is something that I did not spend money on the year prior, and it's going to make me be in the hole the coming year, then I don't need to spend it at all. I think the 5%, the 230,000 is good. That will stay there, and that's not a problem. And yeah, I understand that they already spent 5% with 5,000, which is fine, no problem. But what I'm saying is, why do we even have to have this in the set aside? Why can't it just still be part of the, taking away from the negative balance here? I don't understand why we can't just call it, if you didn't spend it, that's it.
Deb?
That's your decision, but just to help you a little bit, your definition of balanced budget in the financial policies indicates that there are many times when there will be reserves within a fund balance that were placed there in a previous year and are going to be allocated in a future year. It's what makes the capital asset replacement fund work when it's fully funded. So that's why you could list something like that. It would not be considered a deficit budget in the year in which you spend it, because it is reserves within the fund balance that you are now appropriating, and that fits your definition of balanced budget.
But, so, go ahead. Go ahead. I think you're going to ask the question I'm about to ask, and you're going to ask it better.
Do it.
That, however, is not what, that definition is not what leads to that negative 78,000 number up on the screen, though, right? I mean, that, if we spend that money, even though we could make the argument that that was already earmarked out of some past year's 5%, the fact is, if we spend that money, the public safety sales tax balance is going to go down by $78,000, and therefore you're showing impact on the deficit of minus $78,000, right?
On the fund balance, because you're spending money that was previously reserved in the fund.
So your previous comment about our definition of a balanced budget,
Right.
I mean, for the purpose of this meeting, our definition of a balanced budget is that number doesn't have a minus sign in front of it, right?
No, I think you could adopt the public safety sales tax budget. You see, it's still in a deficit, but if you look at 108,868, before we deal with the 83,251, I would explain that in the fund balance notes, that 83,251 of that 108 deficit is not a deficit because it was previously reserved funding, which is being spent next year. My concern is you don't have any reason to budget it right now because you have a contract that goes through June 30th that's only requires $5,000 of it. And you can tell the next contract, if you so desire, that you're going to go back to staying with the total 5% appropriation in terms of what the contract should be.
And I think that was your argument about the one-time expenses versus the recurring expenses, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. We should not tell the mental health board that they've got another $83,000 a year to spend on
So I can
programs.
actually say right now that this is a $25,000 deficit budget because you're spending $5,000 that had previously been reserved purposely towards the expense of the program next year.
Okay, and we will look at this issue of the bond refunding over the next couple of months and see if we can come up with a more accurate estimate.
Well,
Correct.
what
But
I
you-
would like to do is have your authority to go ahead and prepare and present the budget as it is. If we want to amend it, it would be at the last minute. We can do that, but to go ahead and just explain that, on a basically, $4.6 million budget, there's a $25,000.
And that $25,000 was achieved by reducing that, by only committing to spend 5,000 of that 83, right?
Now, you had a structural deficit of 25,000 before that, after you changed the, the funding. So there is a deficit of 25,000 for everything that's being paid for. out of
Right,
the
right, I'm sorry, but we
sales
got down to the 25,000 by only spending,
By
only
only spending
committing to spend 5,000 of that,
Exactly.
of that 83,000.
tax. Right, exactly.
Okay. Is everybody, and I'm not going to ask if everybody likes it, but does everybody understand that? Okay. Do we have any more, Deb, do you have any more issues to take us through, any more decision points to take us through?
No.
Okay, so any questions about what it is that the recommendation to the county administrator is? Mr. Quisenberry? Was that a hand or not? All yours.
I've talked to this with a couple of individuals. I want to point out that our funding currently for the Convention and Visitors Bureau is $15,000 a year, and our funding for the Economic Development Corporation is $5,000 a year. I'm going to suggest, and I'm totally biased since I'm the liaison to the Economic Development Corporation, to say that we should balance that spending perhaps at 10,000 for each of those operations. They both support development in the county. I have a preference for the EDC because I think it's targeted more towards developing jobs, whereas the CVB is more targeted towards developing revenue based on events and activities that go on here. But I'm gonna throw that out there as a suggestion and entertain comments.
Can I ask, based on the fact that what you are suggesting would not affect the budget, that's something that we could take up maybe next month as a matter of policy?
I would say so, but if we're giving direction to the executive, to the administrator to work on the budget, I wanted to get it out here in a committee meeting so that people could be thinking about it.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I think it's good that I think it's good that you brought it out, but I think it's probably something that's entitled to have people think about it in more depth than we're going to be able to do at this meeting. So since it's revenue neutral, I would ask that we proceed with this recommendation, and if we decide next month or in October or November that we want to change how that spending is allocated, my understanding is it comes out of the same budget, so we can do that later. But I appreciate your argument. Ms. Petrie, and then Mr. Kurtz.
Just a point of clarification to Ms. Busey. Can you explain to me the importance of why this evening we need to approve this stage of the budget when we still have some things hanging in the air? And if we approve this, then the means to make any changes is through amendments?
No, we'll get another couple looks at this. The reason for the decision tonight is just to give Deb something to start working on so she can bring us a draft budget.
Yeah, it's not in stone.
This will be, we'll have another finance committee meeting to talk about this. We'll have a county board meeting to talk about this. We'll have the November finance committee meeting to talk about this, and then the final recommendation will be, or final budget will be approved at the November full board meeting. So we got several more cracks at this.
Thank you very much, and that's good for the public to hear, too.
And I'm sorry, I lost the plot. Who is next? Oh, Mr. Kurtz.
No, I just wanted to say, James, I think that's a good suggestion, and that I would certainly look seriously at making that move when we discuss it.
Thank you, Mr. Kurtz. So we'll come back to the decision points here. We have essentially a balanced budget in the general corporate fund based on the recommendations that I'm proposing that we make to the county administrator. We have $30,000, with $25,000 deficit, in the public safety sales tax budget. I am comfortable directing the county administrator to move forward with this if a majority of the finance committee agrees with me. Any other comments, questions, issues that we need to bring up at this point? Ms. Busey.
If you would like to have a perfectly balanced general corporate fund budget, I could probably change the contingency by that 884 so that it would be balanced.
Feel free. It makes it look nice. We know we will be off by hundreds of thousands of dollars one way or the other anyway by the end of the year, but if that makes you feel better, then by all means. Any additional comments, questions going once? Ms. Petrie.
One last question. Do we have a timeline when we'll find out if there's going to be any savings by refinancing the bonds?
They're expected to go to sale in the month of October, so we will know after
By
that
budget
is
time.
done. So I anticipate we should be able to report on that by November.
And Deb, if you can go over when, it was something you said earlier, I think wasn't entirely clear. When would those savings be realized?
They'll be realized, I believe, as soon as this year's budget for the December principal and interest payments on those bonds.
So they will result in a change to the projected final state of this budget. And-
2014 public safety sales
Right,
tax
that's what I mean,
budget.
2014,
Right.
and then they will obviously have effects in coming years as well.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that was going once, going twice, 3 times. All in favor of giving the recommendations we've discussed here as direction to the county administrator, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, Deb, and thank you, everyone, for being here.
Motion to adjourn. Other business, I guess.
Quisenberry, move to adjourn. Do we have any other business? We have no other business. I'll just declare us adjourned.